Everybody hear me okay? Good. Show of hands, show of hands. Hello, hello. All right. Love it. I love it. All right. Well, great to see and hear everybody. Welcome to our second old fireside chat, or VR Salon, I think might be a better name for it. And before I bring on our wonderful guest for today, let's see. Let's have a couple of public service announcements. Thanks to Ryan and team for continuing to build the space out. We're trying a little bit of a different look and feel this time. I'm sitting down. You can't tell. Fred and I are going to sit down on stage and apparently stand up at the same time. Next week we'll get chairs out here. The other service announcement is make sure everybody comes to the load test tomorrow. We're still going to be learning a lot from these. Tomorrow in particular, the avatar's hand and body motion for 100 people should be better in the room than it was before. So please come and help us test that. But this is great. So now let me bring on our guest here, who may be waiting in the wings. I don't see him there. Fred Ehrsam, come on out. Fred is an amazing guy who I met a couple, well, I don't know, I think it was like not very long ago now, as we at High Fidelity started really trying to investigate how we could use blockchain technology for this distributed virtual world. And so Fred has been somebody that I met while we were learning how all this stuff works, and he's an amazing guy who was one of the co-founders of Coinbase, which is well known as being one of the largest Bitcoin and decentralized currency wallet providers in the world. And he's also just a big thinker about all this stuff, and among other things, an investor and advisor to Polychain, which is, there's so much interest around using blockchain technologies for different things. We're in this kind of seed investment stage for blockchain overall, and there are just many, many companies coming out of the woodwork trying to do different things with it, and Fred helps and advises some of those companies. So he's been a perfect guy to talk to about all this stuff, because he is routinely thinking about and debating and writing blogs. Some of you may have read some of his great blogs about these subjects, looking at every aspect of how we're going to use these decentralized kind of databases in the same way that I have spent my life thinking about how we're going to do it. Hey, Fred. Hi.
Hey, everyone. Good to see you. Yep. Nice avatar.
Thank you. For those who haven't, well, you can see Fred's picture up on the wall. What you can't see is that he's actually wearing today, in real life, almost exactly the same shirt. So
coincidentally,
it's pretty funny. One of the other things I realized, we build our features of the virtual world as we go along, and of course, unlike David Letterman, I don't have, like a list of material. I have no teleprompter. I'm not a rock star here, not a president, and I can't get to lists of things very easily. But I've got my little got a notepad on the table in front of me. I've been realizing we've got to build some sort of a good notepad for people when they're sitting and doing things like this. Well, anyway, welcome, Fred. We've got y'all. You're all suited up. You're in the other. We've got Fred in a room here at High Fidelity, and so he's had the requisite 10 minutes to get used to everything. So I hope you're enjoying it so far.
Feels good.
This is an audience of a number of people that are. Well, some of them go all the way back to the very beginning of High Fidelity, our first kind of alpha days, and then we've got a number of new people here. Welcome to all those in blue. Hi.
Hi.
So, give me Fred, I thought maybe like for a first, starter question, that I'd put you on the spot this way. How many people here would like to hear a description of what does the word blockchain mean anyway? Give me a show of hands on that. Okay. That's a yes.
I like the double hands in the back.
So what does it mean? What's blockchain mean?
Yeah. So a blockchain, I think, is a tamper-evident database which has some consensus mechanism around what goes into the database. meaning if you want to put something in, other people have to generally agree with it. And we can't go back and magically change reality retroactively.
I think that's a really important point, right? So what does that mean? Like if I'm a company and I have a database, I can just rewrite history, right? But technically, like tell us, like, why is it that I can do that when I'm, why is it that I can do that with a blockchain and I can't do it? And I'm sorry, why can I not do that with a blockchain, but I can do that if I'm IBM or something?
Sure. I mean, if you're a central company like Facebook might be an easy example here, you can just go and change history in the sense that you could, since you control the central Facebook database, you could go change my entire news feed or everything that's ever been posted on my wall if you so chose.
And why doesn't that happen with the blockchain?
Sure. And the reason that can't happen with the blockchain is every item would be embedded in the blockchain, like every post on my wall, for example. So, and there's a cryptographic data structure of the blockchain, most often what's called the Merkle tree, which allows anyone in the world to see if that data chain has been tampered with. In other words, you can't change one entry without changing the hash of the entire thing, and everyone can arbitrarily store hashes over time. So it's very obvious to anyone
So things that are written,
if you've altered the past.
I mean, things are like permanent there in a way that we've never really had we've never had permanence like that in a sense, right?
That's right. And I think it's really important for virtual worlds, especially as you're creating one where, if you're becoming if you live more and more of your life in these worlds and you're becoming more and more reliant on them for who you are, your social life, your assets, your money, whatever it might be, maybe it's not a huge deal if Facebook can go and alter the past because, yeah, Facebook might not be that important in the scheme of my life right now, but if you're living in this world, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more important.
Now, one thought I had was that, if you go to a website today, it's Google's website. Now, that's because of a certificate, right, which is kind of similar, right? Certificates use some of the same technology like that the blockchain uses, but like when you think about that, like we think about putting information in the blockchain versus certifying things, as being, VeriSign says this is your website. What's the difference between those two?
Certification is more kind of a real-time thing where you can see that, I've signed something in the moment, but if we want to go back in time and if we want to have some kind of reality that's shared amongst many parties, we likely want a blockchain, which is just, again, a fancy way of saying a bunch of data or a bunch of data specifically about the reality we all live in that's all compiled into one place and we can all mutually agree on, and nobody can go back and kind of retroactively change. And it allows, in a sense, it kind of allows you to traverse time too, where you have this ledger of everything that's ever happened, so there's no rewriting history, so to speak.
Right, and that seems like something that, as you said before, it seems like an incredibly valuable thing, I think, as it relates to identity, in the metaverse or in virtual worlds. What about the cost? Like, in essence, right, by decentralizing, the motivation for everybody to kind of store this data for each other is that they get paid, right? Everybody gets paid a little bit. And so what is the cost of, talk to me about, like, the cost of writing information into a blockchain? How should I think about that? If we're wanting to store stuff from the virtual world in the blockchain, what's the lowest cost, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that blockchains are constantly kind of working on. If you look at Bitcoin right now, they're kind of having problems with this, where a write to the global blockchain or the global database is somewhere in the realm of 15 cents, which is pretty dang expensive if you want to if you want to be interacting with the data, which is another blockchain that maybe we'll talk about in a minute. It's about 1 cent there. Mm-hmm. And this sort of shared ledger, this blockchain, the shared version of reality, definitely isn't free, right? It's not trivial for everyone to come to consensus on reality. and it's
Right.
inherently going to be more expensive than I just have a database where I'm the only person that controls it and I can do whatever I want to it. It requires more work. At the same time, I think it also allows you, though, to have a bunch of different people, like High Fidelity, for example, build on what are really open standards and open protocols instead of closed ones, which allows for much greater connectedness in the world and on the internet than you would be able to achieve by doing things in a proprietary way.
Yep. So if we're, one of the thoughts that we've talked about, as you know, is can we store all this? Can we store, how much of what's in virtual worlds can we store on the blockchain, since this idea of having an indelible record of history, I don't know, to me at least, it seems appealing and important for the virtual worlds to come in the same way that it's, potentially important for, say, financial records in the real world. Like, could we store, or what are the problems we're going to run into if we want to store every object in this room, or maybe all the clothes everybody is wearing? If we want to store all that information in the blockchain, like how do we get to that, or do we get to that someday?
Yeah. So at the moment, you're constrained to roughly 15-ish transactions or writes to the database. Those two are sort of interchangeable. The
15 a second?
A second, yes. Sorry,
15
a second. Which will work for some things, probably for you guys at the moment, and won't work for others yet. If you look at what networks like Ethereum are doing, they're trying to scale that dramatically through what's referred to as sharding, which is a fancy way of saying breaking up the database into little pieces such that you have different groups of people verify different portions of them, and they ultimately kind of roll up to a whole, and it still kind of works.
Does that now theoretically that'll let us get to like any volume of writes?
Theoretically, at least a couple of orders of magnitude higher. I won't pretend to know exactly what, but I think it will allow sufficient scale to allow virtual worlds to exist. There's sort of a separate, I guess just one other point that might be important here. When we've sort of been talking about blockchains as like a database, which in some senses they are, but at the same time, it is a more expensive database in the sense that everybody kind of has to verify and come to consensus on what goes into it. As a result, there are a lot of techniques on how you put sort of the minimal amount of things in that shared database that you need in order to form a cohesive ledger or reality. So in other words, let's say I have a really big object in VR that is 500 megabytes or something.
Right.
I'll put a hash of that file into the blockchain, which is very, very small, and ultimately that will refer out to the real piece of data. So you're not, you're sort of minimizing what you have to do in this shared version of trust, which the blockchain represents, and then doing a lot of computation and storage elsewhere.
Yeah, you and I were talking about that earlier, and I think people here have heard me talk about it before, that there are these proposals for, we were talking about IPFS, which is a proposed protocol for storing file data, basically, and then, storing it in multiple locations, but then being able to find it very quickly by number, basically. And yeah, I think that's an interesting topic, right, that probably a lot of people don't, get, because it's kind of hard on the head to get it straight. But that you can have like megabytes of data, like the whole contents of this room, they can be hashed, right? They can everything in this room and exactly where everybody's standing, or whatever data set we care to choose here, can be turned into a hash, and that hash, right, is you can never change that data. So if you put just the hash in the blockchain, just a small number of bytes can be a kind of a pointer to a ton of information that's outside of it. Which is potentially how we could store the whole world essentially on the blockchain.
Exactly.
What about Ethereum versus Bitcoin? I mean, there's got to probably be people here who think about this. Seems like that's like a big debate, right? Like, is it Bitcoin or is it Ethereum? Or, is it how does that work?
Yeah. I like to think about it mostly in terms of what do these networks allow you to do, less so as a competition. I think it's pretty early in the space of creating these blockchains, so we should just be trying to create the best systems that we can that allow us to do the most that we can.
So if there's two, is there going to be two global currencies, or how many different currencies that are like Bitcoin, just as a currency? Like how many different, if you look at 10 years or something, how many different ways are there going to be to pay for something, other than traditional, banking or credit cards?
I think there will be a ton.
Like hundreds of them, or?
Yeah, thousands more. I mean, the reason is that I think that individual communities will want to govern themselves, although still be able to access the larger whole.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you were kind of running your own virtual world. You would want to be able to update and change the rules of that world, and you wouldn't want the global kind of consensus to do that for you. So and the reason I say this is I think that blockchains will increasingly be used as the method to come to a global consensus. In other words, you'll use your Ether or your Bitcoin or whatever the token of your world is to kind of vote in the world. And to give an analogy of why there will be thousands or millions or more of these things, imagine if everyone that held U.S. dollars could come to a Google shareholder meeting and vote on what the company should do. Or everyone, just because Google stock happens to be denominated in U.S. dollars, right? It wouldn't make any sense.
You mean like a sort of a direct democracy or something like?
Yes, correct.
Everybody could electronically vote. Like we've been talking about making a voting machine for these meetings, so it should be fun. We're going to do that, so that you can throw out a question to everybody in the audience and instantly have everybody tally up their vote. That's what you mean, like because they hold certificates to the stock, then they're electronically allowed to participate in voting.
Right. In the same way that if you held kind of the currency of a local virtual world, then you should be able to have some say in what goes on in it. But if you don't, then you probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
So that's one way of thinking about it. I think another way of thinking about it is these different blockchain-based tokens incent different kinds of networks. So Bitcoin was sort of the first one, and it really represents, at the moment, a global kind of transaction network. Ethereum branched out a bit by allowing you to run code on the blockchain. Mm-hmm. So as a result, you could think about Ether as the token to the Ethereum network, really being a token to run code on the global computer. It's like paying for compute power that everyone can agree on. And then we sort of were talking about these others, like IPFS has a token called Filecoin, where the token allows you to pay for storage on a global storage network, right? So these things are sort of interesting in that they're blurring the line, I think, between commodities. Like you could think about Filecoin as just like a storage coin, and what we think about as a quote-unquote currency in a new way, but one that I think will end up being pretty powerful.
It's just fascinating. We were talking earlier about how it makes your head hurt. I mean, some of this stuff is so difficult to get your head around. Like that idea of like doing computing and smart contracts in the Ethereum system is just mind-bogglingly interesting. This idea of like you could, right? Because can't you do like a betting thing, or you could do something that says like if everybody puts their money here in a pot, a little bit of Bitcoin or Ether or whatever, and then if some event happens, on a given day, a week from now or whatever, it rains or something, right? Anything that can be proven electronically, then one of us gets all that money, right? That's an example of the kind of thing you can do.
That's exactly Ethereum,
right.
Yeah,
and it's just incredibly interesting. What do you think as a guy, as I introduced you, as somebody who's thinking about and putting your time into, and who knows, you're thinking about what you're going to do next. What do you think are some of the most interesting uses of the blockchain, that type of technology that we haven't seen yet?
I got to be honest. What you're doing, I think, is really, really important.
Why?
So, in many ways, I might be kind of preaching to the choir here, but if you believe that we're living in increasingly digital worlds, even in the physical world, where all our wealth is a database entry in a bank, or identity is something that Facebook owns a little piece of and Google owns a little piece of, whatever, and that those digital worlds are becoming increasingly immersive, like now we're having this talk in virtual reality, and then the real crazy end state is something like the neural lace, where you have a direct kind of brain-computer interface. then it stands to reason that your reference for what is kind of like real, quote unquote, becomes very, very important. In other words, right now, this whole sort of like fake news problem, right? Like if I see some ads that are like machine targeted towards me and they're on the side of Facebook, it doesn't feel too scary because like I know it's an ad on the side of Facebook. If I'm walking through a virtual reality though, and
Yeah, the other people walking by, right,
yeah, it's like it's what's
are chosen to please you.
exactly, and then you run into this odd question of what's real anymore and what's not, especially and with the neural lace kind of concept really drills that in where if stuff is just being fed directly to your brain, you really have no idea of what's real and what's not anymore. So I think it becomes very important that we have some shared version of reality that we can all depend on, and I think that's what a blockchain more or less represents.
My own story when I started Second Life, of course, from the very beginning, we built a digital currency. We did that more for practical reasons because we figured that people would want to buy and sell things from each other for relatively small amounts of money, and especially back in, say, 2003 when we were, getting Second Life going. There wasn't any way to do that. There just wasn't any way to do it. So we just said, well, screw it. We're just going to create a token economy, and we're going to keep a balance for everybody. We didn't use a decentralized system, but I remember even then thinking, especially as Second Life and as the economy inside it started to take off, I remember thinking, man, we really have to make this safe. And then, of course, the other thing was that we were managing the money supply of it. We had to decide when to add currency to it, and as a single company, we just could if we wanted to. Although we didn't. We sold it on the open market, or we did it in ways that people understood pretty well. But it was fascinating because I started thinking as early as 2007 or 8. I started thinking, wow, what's going to happen next with this? It's such a great thing that people can, across national borders, for example, and just as avatars, pay each other and start businesses together. Where's that going to go next? And I remember at the time thinking it was around the same time that Bitcoin really sprung onto the scene there in 2009. And so I agree. I definitely, I think through the lens of Second Life, started thinking, man, if there's billions, and at the time when Second Life was just absolutely on a tear when it was first growing, you looked at that and you thought, my God, it's going to be billions of people using this thing. How do we keep that money system safe and also just? Like how do we make it work for everybody?
Yeah.
Really, really interesting. Does anybody have any questions? You want to stop and take a question or two? Hey, there you go, Mr. Blue. Come on a little closer. Can I hear you? We don't have our microphones today. I think Ryan changed our audio levels a little bit. Oh, there you go. Question?
I think he's talking, but we can't hear him.
I got a technical question I didn't understand.
Sure.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
There we
yes,
go,
we can
yeah.
hear you now. Sorry, I bet that's our fault. Had the old
no,
mute
no,
button.
I had it muted. Okay, hey, quick question. So, what are your thoughts on the use of Counterparty to represent digital assets in-game? Have you heard of the Counterparty token before and its recent applications?
Have you heard about that, Fred?
Yeah.
Cool.
So Counterparty is basically a way to create your own custom assets on top of Bitcoin. That sounds like the person asking the question is obviously quite familiar with it. Yeah, I think it's another system that could be used to do similar things. I think at the moment it's a little harder to build with, in the sense that Ethereum allows you to do provable computation out of the box, which if you're kind of updating these systems, the computation part tends to be pretty important so that we can all trust the updates that are occurring. Yeah, I mean, that's one of probably many systems that could be used to do these sorts of things.
I didn't know that one, so I'll have to look that up. Thanks for even mentioning it to me. Chaos, you said you had a technical question?
Yeah, what irritated me was like the 15 transactions per second. So my question is it that I can, by using blockchain, I can like record my domain or my virtual identity with like 15 frames per second?
No.
Is it stored, or is it more like a file cabinet for like contracts and financial transactions and stuff, copyrights?
It's chaos. Let me try to take that
Yeah.
first, Fred, and then you have chaos. I think it's a little bit more the latter in that what you want to store. We were talking earlier about how you can potentially store like all the atoms in the universe, so to speak, in a kind of a public record. If we could all agree how to fight over who gets to edit things, then we could potentially store the truth about where everything is. You know, every entity, every pixel in the universe could potentially be stored in what Fred mentioned earlier as something like a Merkle tree, meaning that you basically kind of take space itself, express it as a binary string, and then hash all those strings together so that even if you went out somewhere and you moved one blade of grass, you know, it kind of changes the numbers all the way up the tree. And then to your question, Cass, you don't have to like change this big global database just when you move a blade of grass. You just kind of periodically change it as these numbers roll up and change. So, but identity is a really good thing. You just said that. Now, I just wrote about this. Fred and I have talked about it a bunch. I'm going to try to get more help from Fred in helping me think this through, you know, as a technologist as we build this. But, and I did a blog post about this a couple of days ago. I think that for your identity, what we're imagining definitely makes sense is, first of all, you can imagine that you take everybody here, or most everybody here has a high-fidelity username. You know, mine is Philip. You guys don't see it, but I still use it to log in. And, for example, if you wanted to say, add to my reputation or something like that, we would probably, you know, you'd want to tie that back to the me that you know as logging into, you know, this server. We can write into the blockchain that say high fidelity says I was the first one to register the name Philip, right, Fred? And that information is permanent then in the way that we said. That is to say, I'm the only one who controls that name. Once, say, high fidelity has initially given it to me, I get to control who logs in with that name because I am the one who controls the public key. I have the private key to the public key that is essentially written into the blockchain as owning that name Philip. That's right, Fred?
That's correct, yeah.
And so subsequently, though, and this is what I was talking about in the blog, let's say, Chaos, that you want to say something else about yourself, like your email address, right? In other words, you want to log in to, I said in my blog, you want to log into an event here, like this one, and you want to say, hey, I registered for this on Evite, and when I registered on Evite, I did it with my email. Now, I'm at this event, and I want to come to the event because I belong here, I was let in, but I don't want to tell you my real name. I just want to tell you that I'm the person with that email address. Now, in that case, we can do another thing, which is we can do the same exercise, which is you can prove to someone, probably by exchanging an email message, that everybody here trusts that you own that email address, and you can write that information into the blockchain as well. And so now you have two different pieces of information in the blockchain which can be used independently, one to say who you are and the other one to say that you have that email address. Now, Fred will jump to pointing out to me, for those of you who want to be in a lot of pain in your cerebrum, trying to get this stuff all straight in your head, that there's a whole nother branch of all this cool stuff which is called the zero knowledge proof, where like if you tell me something about yourself in the blockchain, I might be able to kind of tie all this information together and build a bigger picture of you, which maybe you don't want. And that there's a kind of cryptographic exchange, right, which is the zero knowledge proof, where you show somebody something, right, but you don't give them enough information to know that you that you definitely showed it to them or something like that.
Yeah, I mean the equivalent example here would be there's a guest list of 200 people. I can prove to you that I'm on the guest list without telling you precisely who I am.
Right. So that's that you guys is an example of this. I passionately believe, I think some of the same stuff you're saying, Fred. I think we're both kind of on the same. We came on the same spaceship here in terms of our passion about this kind of security and global interests and stuff. I passionately believe that a blockchain-based ID system would achieve this really elegant and amazing aspirational goal of giving people control over their own information. And it also would achieve the goal of as we touched on in there, that even if companies don't mean you badly, you can still break into those databases. And if you break into a database containing virtual world information, that's just unbelievably bad. It's like breaking into, it's like breaking into the IRS's information or breaking into a credit rating system, right? It's just incredibly not okay because you've got all this stuff together.
Or even worse, I mean, to tell it through the eyes of, how many people in the audience read the book Ready Player One?
I bet that, and then
Okay.
everybody who doesn't have their hands up didn't have hand controllers.
Got it. Okay, a good amount. So this is why I think building these virtual worlds on open standards is so critical, and why I find the high fidelity approach to be such a compelling one. If you imagine, the Oasis and Ready Player One, it's run by this central company, IOI, Internet Online Industries. And there's this, as for those of you who've read the book know, there's sort of this adventure battle that occurs over the course of the book where employees of IOI are kind of racing against normal people in the world. And in my mind, there's a huge plot hole in this book, which is that the employees of IOI could just go in and do whatever they wanted to the databases they control about the world. So, I mean, you could literally imagine if let's say Facebook, for example.
Why couldn't you have really found the egg, right?
Right,
they
sure.
could have found it because it's in their database.
And it gets really, really scary, too, because if a central company has entire control of the world, and you're making your living in this world, all your friends are in this world, the idea that a central company could take all your money or even delete you is really scary and completely unacceptable. So it shows, I think, why it's so important to build these virtual worlds on open and decentralized standards. So, and identity is obviously one key aspect to that amongst others, like what you own in these worlds, your digital assets or your currency or whatever it might be. So, I think as a result, the approach that you all are thinking about, which is how do we construct this world in a distributed or a decentralized way on as many open standards as possible, where people can really own their identity and their assets, et cetera, is going to prove to become critical over time. And really any virtual world that's not built in that way, I think will fail in the same way that AOL failed and got steamrolled by the open internet after a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. We feel like if we can do some of these things in the right and open way early on, and we're running just about as well as everybody else that's building these types of systems, you guys are all going to be able to, and hopefully will support us, because the long-term danger of doing it this way is just so much lower. Let's take another couple of questions. Danielle back there. Hi. I can see, Danielle, that you're... Come a little closer. I can hear you, but you're real quiet. Oh, there you go. I love watching, isn't it? There you go.
There we go.
Danielle.
Okay. I was going to ask about distributed, like for navigation in VR, right? So here we have the place names, but how that could be utilized to maybe structure it so that the place names are equally divided among the bit chain to, give more power to the actual users that for the distribution of,
Yeah, let me take, Fred, we have a place name system that's just like DNS that essentially is a mapping between unique names. Like this place is called Zaru, and that place name is owned by High Fidelity in this case, and it points to the IP address of the server that's actually serving us all right now. So what Danielle is speaking to is, and I want to give a kind of a potential answer to that, which is, well, first of all, Danielle, can we store the place names, right, that we're doing? Like, many people here own, lots of different place names. Should we store those place names like in the blockchain rather than in a high-fidelity incorporated database? I think generally the answer there is yes. You had mentioned there are a couple of projects, I think Namecoin is one, right, that seek to essentially do something like DNS, but do it with a coin, right?
Yes, and Ethereum is even having has a system coming out called ENS, Ethereum Namespace, where they're effectively auctioning off their own domain space.
That's really interesting. Tell me about that. Are they going to auction off? How is that going to work?
It's pretty straightforward. It's basically it's like web domain names where you can purchase an alphanumeric string of whatever you want. So you could have like highfidelity.eth, and you might want to bid on that. Actually,
Right.
That might not be a crazy idea now that I say it.
Oh, and so there's a bidding. So there's a bidding from zero. So if
Yes.
what you're saying is the way they're doing it is if there's any contention over an address, they're going to let the largest bidder win in Ether.
That's correct. There still is an openness to this, though, in the sense that there's a more or less an infinite number of possible Ethereum addresses. In the same way that, well, we ran into problems with this, but theoretically there should be almost an infinite number of IP addresses.
Right.
So it's not like you can't build something if you don't get it. It's just the convenience of being able to, as a human, refer to something as high fidelity rather than a big, long hexadecimal string of some kind.
Yep. I see your question there. Yeah, why don't you want to give us a quick question?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I sure can.
Just a brief mention, there's another currency called IOC, or IO Digital. It is also working on doing a decentralized DNS system. This kind of sounds similar to what you're working with.
Cool. IO Digital. Have you heard of that one, Fred?
IOC.
I actually don't think I have. That's cool. We'll look at it after.
IOC.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for mentioning that. I also wanted to add that to Danielle's to extend that a little more. One of the things that we thought about when we got started, and if you go back to some of our earliest documents where we talked about kind of the metaverse and high fidelity and our vision of it, and I think this speaks a little bit to what Danielle was saying. If you think about the IPv4 or IPv6 address space, you can imagine, as you guys know, and Fred, I bet you know this, that as you guys may or may not know, when the internet was originally built, the government, the U.S. government basically kind of controlled the whole address space. And then they started giving away big chunks of it to big chunks of IP addresses. So if you can imagine all the IP addresses that started with 172 or whatever, that's 255 to the third addresses to the right of that, basically. And they started giving away those what were called A-class blocks to like big companies and stuff. And my favorite creepy story is that, as you can imagine, Halliburton owns like the 38th block that was given away. I swear, it's really true. But they started giving away this address space really just to get other curators for it, knowing that like they didn't want to give out all the addresses to the internet in Europe or something. And so they kind of started blocking it out and giving it away. But I kind of thought about this. I sort of had this idea that I think is similar to what you're saying, Danielle, where I imagined, well, what if you thought of the whole metaverse as being like a gigantic addressable space, with numbers running, X, Y, and Z basically. So you could imagine a 3-digit number, with commas or whatever being essentially an address into that space. I kind of had the idea that, what if we auctioned that off in blocks? And of course, it's a little bit like an initial coin offering, right? Which is something that you've followed pretty closely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Like, the whole idea that there needs to be a central party to sort of distribute these things now is completely irrelevant, that we have protocols to do it and economic incentives to kind of govern the behavior around it. I mean, almost the equivalent here is generating a new address on a blockchain, which you can do through free and open source software very quickly. So, but yeah, the whole kind of, it's funny to hear you describe this old process through the new lens, because it already seems quite obsolete.
It is amazing. There's a guy, one of my favorite, let's see, he was an economist, a guy named Coase, who ended up winning the Nobel Prize, as with any economist, many years after he wrote his paper. But he wrote a paper in the 1930s, which is called The Nature of the Firm. And he basically asked the question, he said, if in an efficient market everybody sets prices and buys and sells things from each other, why do we have companies at all? Why aren't we all independent contractors? You know, I come up to you and say, hey, can I do your marketing for a couple quarters? And you know, we argue over that. And what Coase got the Nobel Prize for, and what is really interesting, was he answered the question as to why that was. And what he said was, it's because there's a cost to negotiating. Like, if we're going to negotiate over what you're going to do tomorrow, just tomorrow, you know, what am I going to pay Fred for helping me out tomorrow? Well, we got to email back and forth, and at some point, we're spending as much time talking about that exchange as your work is worth, right? And so we're basically being stupid, you know. The better thing to do would be to say, hey, Fred, how about I pay you $100,000 a year, and you just come to work here, and you do Bitcoin stuff, you know, and that's a way of doing it. And what Coase said is that if you look at the technical detail there, what you see is that the lower the transaction cost is, the smaller companies can be. And so, you know, one of the things that's so profound, just kind of capping what you said there, is that the easier you make electronic mechanisms to, say, adjudicate who has what addresses, the more likely we are to use them. You know, so as technology brings us ideas that allow us to decentralize, you know, administration, wherever it's an economic benefit, we'll take it on. And so, you know, there's this general observation, which this guy made in 1930, which was, look, companies are going to probably get smaller over time because they don't need to, you know, the mass of a large company is antiquated now. It's unnecessary. You don't need somebody to decide that. And I don't think that's true for everything. For example, I think like risk-taking in a startup is something that you wouldn't use direct democracy. You know, if you ask, I've always loved it, if you ask a company, if you interview everybody at the company and you say, what should we do next with our software, you know, with Microsoft Windows or whatever, what they'll basically say, their average opinion will be, don't do anything, you know, just leave it the way it is and keep making money. And so if you do that as a company, you're going to eventually go out of business. You need a startup. So in a startup, of course, you and I were talking about, you can do this with the blockchain as well. In a startup, what you actually want to do is bet on people, right? You want to say, hey, why don't we let Philip make all the decisions for a year? We'll see how he does. We'll give him complete control. You know, he'll be able to spend our money even if we don't want him to. But then after a year, we'll fire him if we don't like what he did. And I think that, you know, again, right, the blockchain allows some very clever ways to do that. You were telling me, right, about like speculating on, what was it, on people or?
I mean, you could speculate on all sorts of things, I suppose.
Oh, it was AI. You were telling me about that AI company that was like speculating
Numerai.
on the success of an algorithm.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's going to get pretty out there, I think, pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is totally right. I mean, blockchains allow you to explicitly and programmatically define how people and organizations and maybe even AIs coordinate, thus dramatically reducing the cost and maybe letting you have much bigger scalable systems in the process.
Comment there? Yeah.
Question.
Yep.
Good question. What do you guys think about VR arcades for distributing high-end VR to customers? I know in Ready Player One they have the plug, and the only reason weight goes to it is because it's not controlled by IOI. So I don't know your thoughts on, should we be thinking of that?
That's a great question, which is, I take that one, which is VR arcades. You know, how much are VR arcades going to be the entry point into VR? I think especially in China, you know, where there is enough of a population density and access and cultural access to these arcades, I think it's very likely that high-end VR access is going to start out of you know, shared public locations, basically. And so I think it's a really interesting observation. I personally have been thinking a lot about to what extent that happens here or not. You know, the cost of the VR sort of access technology is lower here, and I think it's going to drop pretty quickly. But you know, the success of and the really cool things you can do in a shared space does make it tempting. It's funny, we here at High Fidelity, right below our office building right now, there's a great big open space, and we've all been like, man, you know, maybe we should have a big VR arcade and let people come in and use it. I don't know. It's something that we think about, but that's a great observation and question. Viper.
Yeah. So at the moment, all of this is, in terms of the global economy, quite a small thing, right?
Yeah. the total market cap of all blockchains at the moment is like $20 billion, up from, 0 8 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, but in the global scale of things, it's kind of peanuts.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But if everyone's doing it, right, and there's going to be so many good guys, behind this doing the work on it, but there's going to be a hell of a large number of bad guys trying to break it in some way. Does this become more robust with scale, or does like the peril curve suddenly coincide at a point in time in the future?
That's a great question. What do you think, Fred?
I think it's like the internet. Anytime you have a global network that a lot of people depend on, to a certain extent, there's definitely risk in that. I think the part I find interesting about blockchains is the bigger they effectively have a naturally embedded bug bounty program to them. So if you look at Bitcoin, for example, right? Right now, there's approximately a $16 billion bug bounty program on it, and nobody has broken it yet. Which doesn't guarantee that no one will break it in the future, but it gives you a pretty high probability that security in it is good. So I think there's a problem also in the current world if you look at like the credit card breaches as one example, where the economic incentives are very blurred around who's responsible for security, and I think that's really bad for security.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, yes.
But the thing is that these things can be broken not necessarily by breaking the software, right? But by trading algorithms that suddenly cause fire sales, which ripple across the whole system, right? So how do you moderate that situation arising?
Well, we have algorithms that trade on current markets all the time. It's just that the scale of these could potentially be greater. I think there's a point in here which is right, I guess, too. I think in that these crypto economic systems are new, and nobody's really designed them before, and they're probably not the easiest things in the world. It's like basically taking monetary policy at the Federal Reserve, but breaking it out into this whole new system. And I obviously think it's a whole lot better because we have a choice around which systems we participate in and which we don't. So I guess you bring up very valid concerns. The way I think about it is blockchains more or less let 1,000 ideas be tried. So there will be many things tried. There will be many failures. We'll learn much more rapidly. And at the end of the day, my hope is that people will not build all in the same system. I think in the future we will live in sort of a metaverse of blockchain, so to speak, where there are many sort of token systems that we can traverse to do the things we want to do. So ideally there isn't this idea of like a central point of failure, maybe in the way that you're describing. But there will be spectacular failures, don't get me wrong.
I think the other risk at Piper, the other thing that addresses the risk relative to like program trading is that there is a finite transaction cost in most of these systems. It's imposed by necessity. It's fascinating to note that with Bitcoin, for example, there is still this transaction cost, which is relatively high. You said 15 cents to actually instigate a transfer between two endpoints. And those transaction costs, like Second Life has a very, very stable trading value between the Linden dollar and the dollar. And a bunch of people here in this room I know that. It's very stable. And one of the reasons it's stable, which is interesting, is that the arbitrage opportunity is lowered by the fact that the transaction cost on, say, moving from Linden dollars to euros or Linden dollars to dollars is pretty high, right? So the program trading opportunity, like you're saying, Piper, of, machines going crazy is lower. I mean, hopefully also the AIs will save us, right?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? It's right.
Somebody else, I think I saw another question.
I don't have any hand controllers, so I can't raise my hand.
Cool.
But
well, you have a guitar though. You do have a guitar.
Yeah, I'll yeah, that works. But Fred, Philip, this is Brady here. I just wanted to ask one question for both of you. If you could have one thing and just snap your fingers to have in here to integrate blockchains and create this vision you're talking about of meshing the two, what would that one thing be for each one of you? One thing for each of you.
What do you think, Fred?
Just snap your fingers and make it be.
I mean, probably hit fast forward on the scaling of the blockchains themselves. I mean, as we were talking about, the viability at the moment, and the technical limitations of doing something like running a full economy or running a full identity system for high fidelity on these blockchains, 15 kind of reads, writes to the database, or 15 transactions, whatever you'd like to think about it as, per second, can't support really a full-blown economy quite yet. And I wish that was further along.
So you'd like to see us kind of get past those growing pains, settle out whatever Ethereum's going to do, whatever, whether Bitcoin can do their Lightning thing or whatever, and get something working.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of potential solutions to that, like you were mentioning, like off-chain solutions like the Lightning Network or whatever, but yes.
Yeah. Brady, my one, I think I'll answer it a different way. I'd go back to what I said earlier, which is we've been thinking about, and I've been talking to Fred about this, we've been thinking about several different ways that we could have the highest utility for everybody here in use of the blockchain. One of them is clearly writing identity into it, and I think that's cool, and without question, that's what we should do. Another one is obviously establishing a currency that we can all use for trade amongst ourselves. That's another one. Another one is coming up with a way for us all to share file storage. Fred mentioned that with respect to IPFS and Filecoin. I think one of the most useful things that we're going to have to address here, and we're talking about it internally right now quite a bit, is like, how do we share how do we share object information with each other really easily? Like right now you've got your avatar, right? But that avatar, as you guys know, if you do a completely custom avatar like Chaos's avatar, she's got to basically park that avatar out on a file store somewhere, wherever she chose to put hers. And I'd like to see maybe a clever solution that uses a blockchain-based system as a way of allowing us all to share file storage. So that's one that, like, if I could snap my fingers right now and say, hey, let's just try this, and have this up and running, I'd make it so that everybody could upload content right now and then go to another server, right, and just have it show up. So that'd be one of the ones I would pick. Let me see. You can see my hand reaching for it. I'm actually looking at the clock on my own thing here. That's pretty funny to think there is an invisible iPhone right here, right in front of you, right on this stage. So I think we're just about out of time. This has just been so much fun. It's such a delight. Fred, I really appreciate you being a guinea pig for session number 2 of us testing our equipment here and me getting more comfortable being on stage with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool.
Yeah, thanks for coming, and everybody's welcome to, as always, hang out and have fun here, and maybe I'll log back in and see you guys in a bit, and thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Fred. Cool.
Good to see you all.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks a lot. Let's go.
I don't care because I've got the iPhone.